I'll go back even farther. I went to school with a fellow who wanted to study architecture more than anything, and he could never get admitted to the architecture program, so he wound up becoming a plastic surgeon. And he moved to Florida, near Orlando, and he really wanted to be an architect more than anything. And he does a great job as a plastic surgeon. He's also a dentist, but he really wants to be an architect. And so after practicing plastic surgery for 20 minutes, he had enough money to design a home of his own. And he decided he was going to do it himself, and he designed this house, and he got it to a point where he thought it should be drawn up by a reputable architectural firm because he really wanted to set a good standard. So he investigated in the Orlando area where he lives, in Winter Park, and he found a firm that would do the drawings for him, and it turned out that he and his newfound firm won an AIA Design Award for the design of his house. And he was really happy because he fulfilled a lifelong goal, and he found a wonderful architectural firm in Florida that worked with him. Last winter, I was down there visiting, seeing this house that got all this publicity, and he kept saying, you have to come meet the people in the firm. I want you to see this firm because they were very cooperative and they really work with me, and you have to come over there. So I went through the firm, and there were about 50 people there, and walked through and met some of the partners and the people that worked there, and I got to one corner in the office, and I walked into this room, and I found this fellow who's our speaker tonight, Chris Miles, and I didn't spend more than 2 minutes speaking with him and looking around at all the stuff he had in his office, and I realized this guy just has to come here and talk to you. That's the informal part of the introduction. The rest of it I have here on paper because after only a short time with Chris, the longer time I spent talking with him was on the way up from Dayton this afternoon, and I myself don't know a lot about him, but the more I found about him, the more I'm really intrigued by his background and his many talents. Chris Miles is Director of Leisure and Recreation and Entertainment Planning and Design for the firm of Hellman, Hurley, Shervat, Peacock Architects in Winter Park, Florida. He was educated at Oxford Polytechnic and studied applied design and architecture, and then graduated and worked on the animation for the Beatles film Yellow Submarine and theatrical productions. He's got a really unusual group of friends and celebrities, and from 71 to 74 he had Christopher Miles Associates, and he designed thematic fast food restaurants, discotheques, nightclubs, and Britain's first theme park called the Principality of Grech. Thank you. Built out of a castle in North Wales. In 74, he did the largest hemispherical air dome yet built, and was involved in training 60 fellows to joust as knights on horseback, and from 74 to 78, he did a lot of industrial design, including a 4-car train for Xerox that would travel into Russia to sell Xerox equipment, and designed and produced the House of the Stars for Television Times, and worked in Africa, in Uyo, Nigeria, Dodoma, and Tanzania. Did I pronounce any of those correct? Tanzania. In 78 was a board member of the Carnes Design Associates and was responsible for expanding the work of that firm, and he then joined the Little England theme park. He's probably going to tell you a lot more about these things, where they developed a theme park with millions of dollars in Orlando, Florida, and he was the creative director and designer for that project. He's recently in the firm that I just described, has worked on the SeaWorld Whale Stadium, which won an AIA award, and MCA's Universal City Theme Park, and most recently he designed the Camel Amazon Adventure for spring break students in Daytona, Florida. Now, on top of all this, he's made 30 trips to Greece and studied the architecture on the Greek islands from Byzantine time to the present, and would like to write a book or two on that subject. He considers himself an anathema to purist modern architecture, and tonight has come here to talk with us about the reality of architectural fantasy. I've never heard him speak. I've only known him for a few hours. I've listened to hundreds of lectures here, and I'm willing to make a bet that tonight you'll all have a very good time listening to Chris Miles, and I'm really happy he's come up from Florida to join us. Chris Miles.
If I was nervous, I'm not now. Marvin has said it all.
See if they can hear us.
Okay, can you hear me? Yes? No?
Okay, we'll fix it.
It gets close to the throat. This is like being fitted out of a tailor.
How about I just...
Okay, if you just say, can you hear? Can you hear? Okay, great. We'll leave him here. I basically need just two props. I need my vodka and tonic and my buzz cards. There are about 70 of these cards, and if I periodically refer to these cards, it's merely to jog my own memory and to remind myself that there are some slides that I'm kind of supposed to be speaking along with. Before I begin, I really would like to thank everybody here. I'd like to thank the faculty, staff members, all you kind people who have come to listen to this talk that I'm going to give tonight about the reality of architectural fantasy. The facts really are that it is not actually the reality of architectural fantasy, but the reality of fantasy, because I have worked over about 18 years on fantastic projects. And I really want to try and, before I begin, walk you through some of the thematic elements that historically comprise the current theme park, which is the bigger end of the scale of the work that we're doing. Before I begin, I would also like to tell you a small anecdote about a professor of architecture at my college who introduced a speaker before a similar crowd. I was going to mention his name, but there are a couple of members of the ex-alumni present, and so therefore to protect the innocent, we're merely going to call him Professor X. But in this particular case, we were visited by the wife of James Joyce, and I note that word, James Joyce, the Irish novelist. And he said, I'd like to welcome to you this evening the distinguished wife of Joyce Carey. Well, she very quickly rebuked him. James Joyce, she said in a strong Irish accent. And she then gave the lecture, which was very long and rather boring, and he fell asleep. And he was awakened by the clapping at the end, and he stood up and he said, I'd like to thank the wife of James Joyce for a most illuminating talk on her husband. If you haven't got it, basically, please don't fall asleep. I want to talk to you tonight about... You get that? You probably get it if you think about it. Basically, this talk tonight is going to last about an hour and a half, 2 hours. I promise you it won't last any more, because I'd like to get some sleep. And if any of you want to leave now, you can. So, if not, please bear with me. I'm also going to ask to have the lights out, because I want to try and back up some of the things I'm talking about with slides. So can we just try the lights out for a moment and the first projector on? And there's nothing there at all. That's because I haven't operated anything. Home and Holy Charlotte Peacock Architects in Winter Park is a 50 to 60 man architectural group based in Central Florida. It's been in existence for about 8 years and comprises these four principles and around about 55, 56 other mainly architectural people working for it. We have very little engineering, therefore we're not truly an AE firm. And as has already been quite correctly mentioned, I head the Leisure, Recreation, Entertainment Planning and Design division of that company. We're just as a matter of interest about to move into a new building which we've designed for ourselves. This is a 32,000 square foot contemporary building which will house all our different divisions. And some of those divisions are, including my division, include a hospital division that works primarily for Humana, and a division that works primarily for the US Navy. So we're very diversified in the form of architecture and design that we do. Our most recent claim to fame and one of our larger buildings is this $53 million Orange County Civic Center, which is built in Orlando, the result of 5 years of quite close collaboration with the Woollen partnership out on the West Coast. And this is one of the larger convention and civic centers, and is a very multi-disciplined place. It has a phenomenal amount of exhibition space, restaurants, and very attractively themed, and has picked up a lot of awards. We call ourselves the master architects. This is a bit naughty, but the theory basically behind our company is that we try to be creative, and creativity that reaches through the designers is a very important part of HHCP's philosophy. The summary of this speech, The Reality of Architectural Fantasy, is to cover initially some of the historical influences that have brought contemporary theme parks into being. And then I'm going to show you some specific projects that I've been involved in. One of them is an English village, a Welsh medieval castle, a tropical forest, an American colonial pavilion, a Wales stadium, and a Hollywood fantasy. And then, if you're still here, we'll have some questions. Everybody's going, oh god, not old Stonehenge. What I want to do is I want to take you back around about 8,000 years. This is British architecture at its best. You see, actually 8,000 years ago we'd had engineers that were capable of putting up stones, and a lot of English architecture's kind of stayed in that way. So I didn't learn too much really when I left. But the important thing is about these two pictures is that it shows you that early man was primarily thinking and practicing engineering on a relatively sophisticated level, as long ago as that, and basically was able to move quite large standing stones and move them into very accurate positions, Stonehenge being a form of astrological computer. In around 4000 BC, and by the way, I've got some pictures here which are not taken in 4000 BC, but they merely kind of walk you through the kind of experience. This is actually taken in Morocco, but it's as good as 4000 BC. The early Mesopotamians were experimenting with the ziggurat, which is really a fantastic structure. A ziggurat, a tiered, truncated pyramid on many levels. I've seen today some students are still using that as a source of inspiration, and it's a wonderful form. And the point of the ziggurat was that royalty, associating itself with deity, was elevating itself above the common man. And these terraced and tiered structures that elevated themselves above the common man were, in a sense, vessels that protected themselves in the times of floods from the Tigris and the Euphrates River. They passed into legend, and are remembered as the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Their gates and entranceways, the portals, were astonishingly complex and very elaborately decorated with faience and ceramic. They They basically had their architects embellish their structures with much more than mere structure dictated or required. This is a Mayan ziggurat, but in a sense it borrows still from the early Babylonian forms. And we can see that in Babylon and and in Lagesh, in the Mesopotamian Valley, a continuous development of astonishing primarily religious and monarchical structures that survived up until around 2800 BC. The memory of the decoration lasts still today in the Arab world. It has gone almost without change, and these pictures, in fact, although the characters are modern, would probably have been quite recognizable to a Hittite. There is a concept that buildings and kings were seen as one, as Pizarro and his horse riders were seen by the Incas as one creature. Pizarro's men and their horses were seen as one creature. Cone mosaics formed geometric compositions. The facades were decorated with leopards, guardians of the structure. And until the ziggurats began to fall in around 2000 BC, these great structures were continuously added and embellished, basically brick, but carried out and faced in tile. In Nebuchadnezzar's time, the art of ceramics was carried forward even further. These ceramics are in fact Persian ceramics, which are on the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, but again very similar to the kind of Assyrian Hittite ceramics which decorated these early fantastic buildings. Within the markets themselves, the souks, again stayed very much unchanged. This biblical picture was in fact taken in 1966 in Morocco. And in Babylon, there was a great processional way which was 33 to 36 feet wide, which was comprised of paved limestone filled with bitumen and flanked with immense dragons' heads on serpents' bodies. It must have been quite an astonishing thing to withhold. And that was the point, that embellishment on a fantastic scale, almost an unhuman scale, was designed to awe the masses. The interiors had chalk plinths with false marble decorations. These turret structures, as I said, they assured the survival of royalty. And interlinked with the Ark and the Bible, the hanging gardens of Babylon moved into one of the seven wonders of the world. Through the decipherment of the Assyrian and Hittite languages, we even know the names of their architects. I mean, who can forget Nidi Bel, the great Assyrian architect, or Nablo Polassa, another of the great architects who were responsible for these early pyramid projects. In Egypt, both as a tribute to the sun and also as a stone vessel designed for afterlife, Egyptians over the dynasties constructed pyramids. The pyramids, I haven't even got a picture of the pyramid to show because you all know what it looks like, but they're much more complex in their structure and obviously not designed to service man in his everyday lifestyle. A pyramid example of fantastic architecture. The early pyramids were in fact faced with very highly polished marble and capped with bronze. They lie on these mysterious ley lines, which are religious points that emerge all over the ancient world. The fluted columns in the great Egyptian palaces were inspired by papyrus and other organic materials. Lotus flowers formed the capitals. There was an intertwining of gigantic details, animals, sarcophagi, creatures, basically extraordinary architectural shapes, obelisks, pylons, hypostyles. You can really go to the library and look all of these things up, and you probably know them already, but nevertheless, they are examples of phenomenal exciting, extraordinary architecture. Leisure time for the pharaohs and for the kings was basically duck hunting, horse racing, occasional trip to the beautician, and that comes down to us through the very rich wall paintings of Egypt, Upper Egypt, and also Minoan, and Crete. These buildings heighten the distance between the royalty and the common mass. In Crete itself, an extraordinary place in the Mediterranean, which, by very reason of its island position, required no defences. Multi-story palaces grew up, which were almost entirely developed for leisure. This is the great palace of Phaistos in southern Crete, and the great floor that you see here on the right was the interior courtyard, which was specifically designed for bull vaulting, which is, I don't recommend it, they used to gamble on it. And the floor is actually lined with alabaster, white alabaster. It must have been a very, very beautiful thing to see when it was in its original form. The multi-storied palaces show immensely complex planning, a labyrinth of rooms of intertwining cisterns and pipes to carry running water, and basically a whole series of what to us now appear to be completely illogical shapes, strange columns that basically taper downwards to the base. Immensely rich colours. And in the interiors rooms, which are the rooms of royalty signified by the rosette, which is the symbol of royalty that's lasted down the centuries. Decoration, mystery, coupled with unhuman scale, dominates these structures. Architects then deliberately heightening the interface between godly and mortals. And buildings and artifacts are also lavishly decorated, as in the great court of Darius, at Persepolis, and here in the Acropolis in Greece. Now, today we see some stark Pentelic marble. In fact, at the time that these structures were first begun and completed in the 5th century BC, these were all highly coloured, gilded. The statues were painted, lipsticked. The Temple of Nike, the Erexium, and these goddesses now, which shine to us in a much pure sculptural form, were in fact really Hollywood goddesses. Outrageous. This is part of the great harbour at Rhodes, and the Greeks basically had a lot of fun with building. They were able, around the 3rd century, to construct a giant man over the top of the harbour in the form of a lighthouse, a giant man, and this is a definite recorded fact. We even know the name of the Arab who bought the pieces when it finally fell down in an earthquake. This was made of bronze, and it was known as the Colossus of Rhodes, and it was another project that passed into the myths of the 7 wonders of the world. Now, we can't go far also without making some reference to Romans, and Romans are really responsible. This, by the way, is part of Ephesus, which was a Greek site in Asia Minor. The Temple of Diana of Ephesus basically lying sunk beneath the reeds there, still yet to find out, one of the great 7 wonders of the world. The Romans, who took this place and their subsequent long dynastic period, are the architects who are really responsible for coining the word leisure architecture. And under the very many different mad emperors, They developed a whole series of stadia, hippodromes, amphitheatres, all of which were given to the pursuit of either sports or, in one particular case, the flooding of the Colosseum at Rome for a game, a massive battle, a battle of triremes in a game called Navmarkir, in which about 60,000 soldiers lost their lives. Basically, can you see the difference? Not a great deal of difference between a Roman amphitheatre and a modern SeaWorld dolphinarium. The whole point about this is really it's all been done before. And with the slaughter of 307 prisoners of war in the great Forum of Tarquini in 358 BC, the Romans heralded centuries of cruel spectator sport, which is of course echoed and forerunners of the paddock gladiators who combat in the bowls that dot our country today. Architects of Rome had the same problems that we do. They had the same problems of sightlines. The word vomitory actually is a place where you go to throw up when you've seen too many Christians done in. Crowd control, shade structures, acoustics. And what architect would not give his right arm to work on Herod's winter palace? This massive lump of rock is called Masada on the Dead Sea, and on the left-hand side is the tiered palace of Herod that was hacked from the living rock. The architect had a wonderful time here, basically using conscripted labour to sculpt out a whole series of platforms, and Herod was very happy here for quite a long period of time. Ultimately, this place became the stronghold of the Zealots, and it took Vespasian 100,000 men to capture the few Zealots who all decided to put themselves to death before he got to them by filling in the valley. And you can see the ramp, the massive stone ramp that rises from the base of the valley floor to the side of this rather a magnificent processional. The marble and census habitat of the Emperor Diocletian, which is, I think it's a little focus there if we could get that, which is in Split in Yugoslavia, which remained almost undiscovered until the 19th century, behind a whole series of houses, and greatly inspired the architects of Georgian England. My final point, if you haven't already got it, is, and we can look quickly at the Alhambra in Granada, which is an example of medieval, post-medieval Moorish architecture. It shows luxuriance, embellishment, deception of design, light and shadow, symbology, and so on. Man, obviously, common man, the peasant, took basically no part in all of this early stuff. This is all royalty. He just merely lived around in a few hovels, very, very poor way of life, and that went on for centuries, for millennia. His basic job was that he should awe and gape and worship the royalty that passed by in their carriages. But in about the 14th and 15th centuries, particularly in medieval Europe, things began to change. The king, the royalty, and his position began to be challenged, and furthermore, some kind of limited economic advancement of the peasant meant that the peasant began to have more time, and with it, he spent his time at the equinox fairs. The fairs are one ingredient of the current theme park, and of course there's nothing really architectural about a fair. But I'm going to talk about fairs if you give me a few minutes. At the equinox fairs, which were held obviously at the solstices, the summer solstices and so on, bartering and trading took place, horse trading particularly, and when of course they didn't have time to trade horses, they raced horses, and so racing horses began as a sort of spectator sport. Other things began as well in the fairs. There was juggling, and balancing, archery, and jousting, and even kissing the wench. And the interesting thing is that the present-day carousel on the fairground has in fact developed from a training device that was used by knights. And darts, the English game darts, which are merely shortened arrows, in fact again developed from archery. And as the fairs grew, a new breed of men, the showmen, grew with them. And they carried around all over Europe the new inventions of the day. And one of those new inventions was the magic lantern, which was designed by Johannes Zannes in 1646. Here's the carousel. And these troops, these showmen, basically travelled around and with rolling fairs, and they even appeared in England in the dead of winter in ice fairs, which of course gave rise to the sport of skating and ultimately to the Winter Olympics. So you get my drift. In 1646 and therein afterwards, optics, which came around with the magic lantern, in fact caused a new kind of building to be constructed. It was called a peeporama, or a cosmorama, or a diorama. It was basically a cylindrical building that was able to project the image from outside inside, and it was through such devices that Canaletto, the Italian painter, was able to paint such very accurate perspectives of Venice and London. And they began to discover that it would go the other way, and they learned that they could project and frighten people with ghosts that would hover over people's heads. And at the same time, or a little bit before, the Globe Theatre in London, which had basically been a place where Shakespeare had put on many of his plays, was a training ground for staging of various types. And so all of these things gradually start to slot together. And by 1794, the French Revolution basically overthrew the palaces of the kings and the barons, and the people were let into these magnificent grounds like Versailles. And Paris had its very first amusement park. It was called the Parisian Amusement Park, and it was actually based in the grounds of Versailles. And European capitals copied this all over Europe. There was the Tivoli in Copenhagen, and the Battersea grounds in London. But in some of the great country houses, where things have gone a little bit freer, the owners of these country houses began to experiment with kind of fun things. They began to take water under pressure and run the pressure to basically propel singing canaries and all kinds of strange and wonderful devices. In fact, in one Austrian palace, there was a table in which the invited audience sat down, and the baron controlled the levers, and he was able to shoot squirts of water up the aristocratic skirts. All of this basically leads one to move forward to the fact that there was a confluence of ideas in leisure that was attractive to both nobility and the common man, and so rather than the two being very separate, the two are now kind of moving together. The Industrial Revolution brought about the invention of steam and the steam engine, and with it the power to pull and to whip around and to whirl all those fairground toys that had been kind of slowly developing and been operated by boys up until this period. And a name to conjure with is Sidney Soane, who in 1863 invented the cam, and coupling the cam to the fairground steam engine produced the first steam fair. And now you begin to see another element beginning to come to place, which is the amusement machine. And the amusement machine was basically developed as long ago as 1850s, 1860s, and many of the ideas that we see today in a modern fairground, in fact, emanated from a period 1860 to 1900. Again, there was really very little new. The only thing that's new today are the hydraulics and the electronics for controlling these machines. This, incidentally, is a steam yacht, which is an antique piece. It was actually constructed before the turn of the century, but is still working today in fairgrounds in England. And in fact, it was basically built to represent to the America's Cup yachts, Lee's yachts, to celebrate the first running of the America's Cup, which of course Australia just won, in 1851. Foundries were another important part. Foundries began to smelt iron and to be able to cast very complex shapes, some structural and non-structural shapes, which in fact contributed to a lot of the embellishment and the decoration that came into being in the next 40 years from 1850. At the height of the Victorian influence in England, in 1851, a very extraordinary building suddenly appeared in the ground. Unfortunately, I haven't got a picture of this building, but it was in fact the Crystal Palace, which was designed by the architect Joseph Paxton, and it was built basically for Prince Albert and for Queen Victoria. And it was the very first national and international exposition, and I want to tell you a few things about it. And we're going to look at a building which was completed not long afterwards, which is Kew Gardens. This is a very miniaturized version of the Crystal Palace. And this picture's only really there just so that I can talk about the Crystal Palace. The Crystal Palace itself was hundreds of feet in length. It was many, many stories high. It was quite an extraordinary building, and one of the unique things about it was one of the very first buildings, if not the first, to be constructed on a modular basis. In fact, some details. There were 300,000 panes of glass of a standard format, 49 by 10 inches, manufactured for this particular pavilion. And they were produced in barely a few weeks. There were 3,230 prefabricated cylindrical columns and girders which were produced for the Crystal Palace. And the Crystal Palace, in fact, was to last until well into this century, when unfortunately it was moved to a new site and then burnt down in a rather savage fire. It was, by any stretch of imagination, a fantastic building and worthy of fantasy architecture. Its upper tiers were shaded from the sun by unbleached calico to regulate light and temperature. And Queen Victoria said, "I think it's fantastic." And Prince Albert said, "Nations must work together for the benefit of all." Those are the only, and those really are true quotes. So if Queen Victoria thought it was fantastic, it really had to be fantastic. The International Exhibition business was launched in 1851, and there have been very many since, and each one is a mirror of its own time and architecture. With the shambang, the masses, now with their days off and with spending power, visited the seaside, and responding to a new market, architects and engineers began to work on projecting their imagination out into the sea. The lovely thing about a pier is the fact that it was a poor man's ship, and they could waltz and dance and dine at the end of the pier and imagine that they were on one of the great four-masted, four-funneled steamers. And because India was a place of inspiration, architects took some of the great forms which subsequently influenced people like architects like Lutyens to produce astonishing fantasies of design, using cast iron for their metalwork, and look at the tracery and the detail in the balconies and the overhanging cornices, and very delicate, although now ruined, very delicate little pavilions. This invention, the pier, was only made possible by an engineering technique which was invented in 1865, which was called the screw pile. And it was through the use of the screw pile, and it's the engineer who invented it coupled it to steam, where they're able to make the foundations in the soft sand of the English Channel. And as a result, almost every town around the continental coast had a pier. And of course in America you had piers as well. The above surface structures were riots of Oriental and Indian influenced domes and cupolas. Bathing pools and machines, gravity slides like this is a helter-skelter, developed quite rapidly around this time, with the quite rapid easing of the Victorian strict morale. And into the Edwardian period, there are all kinds of pictures of early water parks. Again, I apologize for not having pictures of these, but I can assure you that almost everything that you might see in a modern contemporary water park, wave machines and all of these things which we now work on, were all basically invented in the late Victorian and early Edwardian periods. Now, bringing together all the various different key elements of a theme park: fantastic architecture, the public playground, the park, the fire machine, showmanship, the theatre, about which we could easily have an entire lecture, external transportation in the form of the bus, the charabanc, the train, but internal park transportation was still a concern, and people moving was a problem. The streets of the great cities of Chicago and Paris and New York were basically blocked by the late 19th century with horse-drawn vehicles. And efforts were therefore made, in fact, to invent as rapidly as possible systems which would elevate people and which would carry them on track-powered devices, people movers. And believe it or not, the very first experiments were made by a Frenchman called Dalifol in Paris in 1874. And by 1893, at the Chicago Columbian Exposition, there was already an operating 1-mile elliptical track that would carry people around, and many hundreds of thousands of people were carried on this particular system. In France, Paris went underground with a Parisian labyrinth, which is now the metro, and H.G. Wells, who was the great futurist who, remember, has written many phenomenal future-looking books, described a world of transport in The Sleeper Wakes. And I'd just like to read you just a very short bit from that, because he sees this fantastic world. Under a balcony, this extraordinary roadway runs swiftly to his right, an endless flow rushing along as fast as a 19th century express train. An endless platform of narrow, transverse, overlapping slats with little interspaces that permitted it to follow the curvature of the streets. Upon it were seats, and seated in crowds upon the two widest and swiftest platforms, or stepping down from one another down the steps or swarming over the central space, an innumerable and wonderfully diversified multitude of people. Does this not sound like Disney World? 1889. In anticipating the people mover systems, we are only now getting to terms with these forms of transportation for both parks and ultimately for cities. In 1889, Gustave Eiffel built his great tower, which was an improvement on Latin's wooden tower of the Crystal Palace of New York. And then finally in Chicago, as I've said already, in 1893, there was the Columbian Exposition. All parks were gradually coming under the leisure, recreation and entertainment definition. The Columbian Park was designed and planned by Frederick Olmsted, one of the great American planners of the turn of the century. And people like George Ferris, who invented the Ferris wheel, first appeared there with a wheel that was astonishing in both design and engineering. It held over 1,220 people and lifted people more than 240 feet into the air. So the piers, the parks, the theatres, the fairgrounds must also be added the significant contribution of international expositions, more than 30 since 1851. Engineers and architects all over the world have in fact benefited from these projects as training grounds for their own careers. Moshe Sadfi in the Habitat in Montreal in 1967, Paul Nervi, the great Italian engineer who built such astonishing structures for the Rome Olympics. Olympic Games, of course, very similar type of projects. And, of course, even Buckminster Fuller, who managed to get his geodetic dome finally built for the general public at the same Montreal exposition. Expos are the show business of architecture. And basically, they can be summarized, and I don't want to dwell a great deal of time on this because I've got much more interesting things to show you. Can you hear still, by the way? Can you hear? Wake up! The expos can be summarized as the Crystal Palace era, from 1851 to 1876, the Centennial era, from 1876 to 1889, the Neoclassic period, from 1889 to 1893, the Art Nouveau period, from that period on until 1925, the modern period, from 1925 until the war, and then, of course, the post-war period. And really too numerous to mention here, although it would be lovely to demonstrate them, are the many examples of fantastic architecture that these expositions have brought about. In 1904 in Kansas, in St. Louis, Missouri, architects reconstructed the entire Chinese Summer Palace of Peking. In Chicago in 1933, again some extraordinary structures, modernistic skyscraper structures. The Indian Maharaja's Palace, which was built in Wembley in 1927. And many new inventions have also been presented along with architecture, new engineering devices, brand new inventions like the light bulb, the typewriter, the sewing machine, plastic, the telephone, and so on. The study of international expositions is quite an interesting one, and I recommend you to follow it at some time in the libraries. The Chicago Century exhibition of 1933 had very noble aims. The commissioners basically described a brief in which the architecture of building and grounds would illustrate the art of architecture since the Great Fair. But these buildings were industrial design packaging with a modern touch rather than function dictated. In 1951, we will get to some more slides, I gazed on my own first expo, which was the Festival of Britain in 1951 by the Thames in London, and observed there again some extraordinary structures, the Skylon, which was designed by architects Powell and Moyer, the Dome of Discovery, and the Festival Hall, which is still standing. And two of its designers, Beverly Pick and Tony Beams, are friends of mine today. In short, and just basically to summarize the position of expositions before I come on to the theme parks, which is the real meat of this project, of this talk tonight, is that according to Lawrence Zimmerman, who is a fellow architect, they are mounted to dazzle and emotionally move large audiences. Their architectural environments are both theatre and performance. They may play in a Crystal Palace or in a park, in the cities of plaster of Paris, with neoclassic columns, or in pavilions moulded like confectionery, in jewel towers or streamlined structures. The basic format is very similar to a theme park and the origins of a theme park. Can we get some focus there? Is that possible? As a final view back to, is this Paris or is it not? This is Disney. This is Disney Paris, with the Eiffel Tower in the background, which incidentally was painted yellow in 1900 to celebrate another major exhibition. All of these structures are part of the leisure, recreation and entertainment scene. I now like to basically introduce myself as another player. As you've heard, I moved, in fact, believe it or not, into film animation in the mid-60s, and in 1967 was lucky enough to be invited to become a unit director and design correlator on the Beatles film Yellow Submarine. By the cheers, I assume you all saw it. Some words of interest about that film. The Beatles had absolutely nothing to do with it at all. The film was made to get them out of a contract. They were required to make 4 films and they only wanted to make 3. The animated film was a very useful way of spending money and not involving the Beatles. And sadly, not even the voices were the Beatles. They were actors who played the Beatles. But we did, of course, meet the Beatles, and we got to know all of them very well. And they had a lot of creative input into the film. The film was primarily designed by Heinz Edelmann, who was the German illustrator from Twen magazine. And very early on, I began, having had primarily architectural training, to become involved with a much wider range of design disciplines, of artists, of graphic designers, animators, and ultimately stage designers. And we'll talk about that in a second. This was Old Fred in the Yellow Submarine. And this film basically took something like a year to put together, and rocketed all of the people who had been closely associated with this film into some kind of minor stardom. We got a lot of backwash from this film. Right, we have now, I think, a change of projector. If you can arrange that. In the same year as the Yellow Submarine, I was more than fortunate to meet a man who basically shaped a lot of my design attitudes and philosophy. This is the Irish architect and stage designer Sean Kenny, a name perhaps not known to you, but a name very respected in the theatrical world, and particularly in Europe. Sean Kenny had rocketed to fame with the design of the sets, very extraordinary sets for Brendan Behan in The Hostages in the late 1950s and early 60s. And this man was in fact a disciple and had been a student of Frank Lloyd Wright. In fact, he had sailed a boat to get to America, and when he'd finally arrived in America, he'd gone all the way across to Frank Lloyd Wright's home in Arizona. And he surprised the old man having breakfast. And Frank Lloyd Wright looked up and said, "And who the hell are you?" "I'm Sean Kenny and I've come from Ireland." "You're late. Get yourself a shovel and go out and build yourself your own home." That was Frank Lloyd Wright's philosophy for his apprentices, his students. And through Frank Lloyd Wright, Sean Kenny learned that basically to do away with all kinds of frippery. He was responsible for the set of Oliver, which is probably one of the most daring and outrageous productions ever mounted on the stage. And in the 60s, Kenny personally overthrew the proscenium arch. He designed and developed the thrust stage, the use of mechanical sets and staging devices, the use of revolves and hinged trucks, and the use of hydraulics. And if you would like to just bear with me, there's a story of the Flying Dutchman that Sean Kenny designed for the Royal Opera House in Covent Garden in England, which was represented as a giant stage moving on a huge hydraulic arm. And during the singing in the storm in which the thing was gyrating around, the singers actually complained of being seasick. They basically hated Kenny, and Kenny hated actors. Kenny loved sets and he hated actors. And in addition to designing sets for the theatre, Kenny also designed the gyrotron. Now the gyrotron was designed for Montreal in Expo 67 and was in fact an aluminum tetrahedral, a small one and a large one, and it was a fun ride that was designed to be a spaceship ride that you would basically go up inside this tetrahedral and you would come out of the top and you would go along a precipitous narrow causeway about 150 feet above the St. Lawrence, and then you would dive down into the mouth of a giant octopus where you would be flayed and beaten alive, and you would finally emerge through a pirate attack and out into the open. Well, this didn't work. This cost $4 million to produce, and it didn't work. And finally, Mayor Drapeau, who was the mayor of Montreal, got so annoyed with this, he said, "This must work. I insist upon this working." And he and his party set off in a very rickety system of chairs. And these chairs were designed, you sat in them sideways for them to start. And these chairs were designed to move through 45 degrees so that the audience would be propelled forward. And unfortunately, on this day, for Mayor Drapeau and his party, the chairs did not move through the 45 degrees, and Mayor Drapeau and party were carried sideways at 15 miles an hour through this experience, emerging sideways out over the St. Lawrence River. Terrifying. And Mayor Drapeau also wanted it closed down. But the structure is interesting because it's the use of aluminum that won for Boyd Orger, the structural engineer, a gold medal from Alcan. And this predates Spaceship Earth by 16 years. And I guess I keep showing you projects which kind of predate Disney, and I'm not trying to do that intentionally, but I'm really trying to show you that over the centuries there is a continuous and evolving theme that we play with, and that this really represents the mixture of theatrics, architecture, mechanics, brought together with some kind of concept of staging to provide some kind of fun ride that somebody will take seriously. Kenny was a creative genius, but he was also a financial disaster. And during the years that I worked for him, we worked on an underwater city complex in Nassau in the Bahamas, which was basically built on a reef about 70 feet lower than it should have been. We worked on the New London Theatre for staging devices for that, a nun's chapel in the Rocks in Ireland, and staging for Las Vegas in the Dunes Hotel. None of the pictures, I'm afraid, I have with me at the moment. However, I did bring with me some of my early stage sets, which were studies for guys and dolls, just to show you that I've been there too. I've Seen You Cut Lemons, which was Diane Cilento and Sean Connery, and Joan of Arc, which was a set that used very Gothic shapes, stainless steel towers on trucks, which moved together to form cathedrals, forests, and so on. We were very involved in the theatre, and at Kenny's studio as apprentice, we were involved in working lunches with some of the great names of theatre and film. On my very first day, I had lunch with Orson Welles. On my very next following day, I had lunch with Albert Finney, and with Sheila Delaney, and with Sean Connery, and with Lionel Bart, and with many of the names which has made film and theatre. And the astonishing thing about this, and this is something which is really great, and if an architectural office can ever get this together, is to have these lunches and bring in people, kind of creative people, heads, thinkers, and so on, and basically widen the whole thing out a bit and break it down, break new ground and talk about it. I was involved, this is an appalling slide, I apologize for this, but this was the only kind of colour thing that I have left of Gulliver's Travels, which was a breakthrough in the theatre insofar that every set for this particular production was back projected. In 1968, back projection by use of carousel projectors was only just beginning, and the projectors would burn out. They were not industrial projectors. The bodies would basically melt. And Kodak in Germany brought out a new S projector carousel that had a body that was strong enough to withstand the duration of a major theatrical run. And with Michael Darbo, who was a pop singer at the time, led us, in fact, in 1969, 1970, to be able to work on Expo 70 in Japan, in Osaka, Japan. I myself contributed a very small design part to the industrial design section of this building, again by Powell and Moya, which takes a Japanese theme. And of course the exhibition itself was a masterpiece of Kenzo Tange, the great architect and planner. And in the subsequent years we worked on The Mirror of Time, which was an audiovisual project for the Bars of Bar, The Battle of Britain, which was another breakthrough in multiplexed computer-controlled slides. There was 3,000 slides which were all synced together by tape that ran over a course of 8 minutes, and therefore we were able to achieve very realistic movement in using entirely original film documentary material which we obtained from Germany and from the English archives. The expos of Osaka borrowed on concepts which had been developed from Disney. Disneyland, in fact, opened in Anaheim in California in 1955. And the theme park basically evolved out of the zenith of the amusement park, which had reached its heyday around about that period. From 1955, all over America, effectively, the amusement parks, which were merely machine rides for adolescents primarily, in fact began to die. Their gates went down, and the theme park, spearheaded by the Disney organization, began to evolve with a concept of family entertainment for all tastes. The theme park would fit within a community. It would not threaten the community as the amusement park did. It would give all kinds of soft thrills as well as the hard thrills of the rides to a much wider, more diversified sector of the public. It would embrace the community. It would be safe, it would be entertaining, it would be clean, and it would be, above all, efficient. The Disney formula, which has been much copied, has moved the world from the puppets, the Punch and Judy hand puppets and the marionettes, in which the audience is merely a bystander, to a world in which they are not just watching but participating. And I see this as a trend which is going to continue into the future. A trend for more and more realism and for more and more real interpretation of fantasy. Currently we watch Pinocchio and we still look at Pinocchio, but eventually we will become Pinocchio. The physical incarnations of Mickey and Donald and their eye-compressed cousins, the audio-animatronic cousins, are life-size and believable. They are the forerunners of robotics and of the droids. And the Disney formula has been so successful that it has been described as the largest human trap ever invented by a mouse. But the Disneyland and the Disney World parks were still basically children's parks. They were parks for children and for adult children. And the sources of inspiration in which they drew their worlds, and you see here at the end of Main Street, the castle of the princess, is drawn as direct inspiration from the castle of Neuschwanstein in southern Germany, which was designed for the Mad King Ludwig III of Bavaria. the architectural development of Disneyland and Disney World is in some sense very worrying. It concerns the architectural community, and I support that. Why does it concern it? There is basically a collision of long-held design principles at stake. People, set designers, animators, scenic artists, contractors, are the people who, with architects, came to put together Disney World. And in doing so, they basically upset many of the values, the proportions, the golden sections that originally created these buildings. The first floor is to human scale. The second floor, you'd be hard work to put a midget inside. At risk, then, are the relationships of scale, as well as the questionable use of materials. Many materials, of course, in the theme park world are phony, and I want to come on to those in a minute in our own theme parks which we've designed. Out of the lands, the Disney worlds, have come the concept of thematic architecture. The frontier land that draws on the Wild West, which in itself is a questionable source. The lands of old Bavaria that basically produce buildings with phony pitches and angles, with roofs that make no sense. All of this is very questionable. And yet, I can support it by saying that it is a combination of theatre and architecture, and that it is, in fact, described as facade architecture. A building is rarely what it seems to be. Structure is the very minimum that is required. Detailing is the very minimum that is designed to fool the eye. To fool the eye not for a long and pleasurable experience, but for a very short period, for a few minutes, no more. Theme park architects were faced with the market forces. Theme parks have to make money, they have to operate efficiently, and above all, they have to demonstrate the theme. Disneyland and Disney World, on the other hand, are phenomenal training grounds and trial grounds for new things. The method of moving waste by suction, the method of converting that waste through pyrolytic conversion into heat that is fed back again into the internal grid system. Disney has evolved a whole series of building codes that are substantially more detailed and evolved than the standard AIA codes. And theming was not a problem that I had with my very first theme park, which is the Principality of Grieg. Some little bit of detail to the background of this is that in the 70s I was now a self-styled leisure designer and consultant, and I was working for a group called Scotia Investments in London that had got all kinds of properties all over the United Kingdom. And one of the properties, they called me one day and said, "We've got a castle. What do we do with it?" And I went up and I saw that, in fact, it was a real castle. It had apparently overgrown. It was rather like a Sleeping Beauty castle. It was covered with weeds and it was in an appalling state. And therefore we decided to launch it into the Principality of Grieg. And this is a basic, very simplified plan that shows that it was constructed within 200 acres of ground, and that there were some already existing buildings which were very run down. And we decided to leave those alone. Rather than spend any money on those, we decided to heighten their age by in fact, destroying them even further. We basically had a great deal of fun pulling the stones out of walls and making the whole thing look a lot older. And we invented jousting. We reinvented the sport. The place was a set in which, with the addition of crenellations and turrets and canopies and flags and banners and all the other things, we could carry out a three-dimensional medieval fantasy. And we decided to hold jousting. We knew nothing about jousting at all. We just nearly knew that it was a whole load of camp guys on horses riding up and down with spears And we knew nothing initially about knights and horseback, but we very quickly found out. And as we began to find out, we began to research back into old documents and so on. We began to experiment with horses, with men who were prepared to come and do this. And we put together our very first jousting group of people. The problems in this castle were real ones. They were real architectural and planning problems. The 200 acres had to be completely replanned, re-landscaped. New drainage, new septic system, new generator, new electric substation. The parts of the castle were turned into lists or jousting bleachers. Landscaping, lighting, illumination. And all of this in a relatively very short time. It's a project that everybody would dream about getting, because it's the kind of project that you can be the Führer, you can be the master. Everybody is operating to your central design. And this project was carried out with very few, remarkably simple, low budget. So there's no excuse about some of these structures. They are very cardboardy to look at, plywood, marine plywood, but graphics, huge paintings on doorways, passports which will allow you to enter the castle, customs posts, and then the knights themselves. And we took this really seriously. And in the period 1971 to 74, I personally built and had the largest private cavalry in the world. General Custer has nothing on me. These guys came from the film world. They were out of work stuntmen, and they were only too glad to be offered a position of becoming a Knight of King Arthur, or whatever title we prefer to give to them. And here you can see, this is still very primitive, we're just beginning here with this. There's a standardized use of yellow and red that runs, this is to keep down the paint cost, but also, in fact, a very effective graphic system that runs throughout the castle. And believe it or not, in the mass of grey stone and dark green woodland behind it works very effectively. We built a railway through the woods that was pulled by a dragon, a magic dragon. We brought in craftsmen and we dressed them all up in medieval costume. And we realized basically that we hit on a formula that was kind of neatly called nostalgic entertainment. Something that nobody ever done before. And so we formed a company called the Company of Knights. And again, this whole subject is phenomenal. We'll have many, many carousels full of the development of how we went around designing swords and armor and all the various other things. But basically, these pictures, in fact, will kind of give you some of the flavor. This was Andalusian bullfighting horses, which we brought from Spain. And we eventually had 25 of these bullfighting horses. We had another 15 horses, show horses of various different types. We had trucks and trailers. And we pulled these things all over Europe, and we mounted and we put on for governments the reenactments of the great medieval moments of the past. And in 1974, these guys were looking like this. Real men, real horses, phenomenally expensive costumes that were completed in velour, in velvets, in special brocades and materials. And they took part in a 2-hour presentation presented in 4 languages simultaneously, in Flemish and German and French and English, in the center of the great Belgian squares. And this picture will just give you the scale. This is the largest tournament ever carried out, I believe, since the Tournament of the Cloth of Gold. I designed it and directed it. And to give you an idea, there are 500 people in costume. There are 10,000 people in the audience that sit all the way around the square. It's almost impossible to give you the majesty of this scene. There are 100 horses which are fully caparisoned. The whole show is controlled by radio control with mics, film music, and so on. And as a money-making concern, it was a phenomenally successful venture. In 1974, we wished to build an image and run with that image, the image of knights, and then to use that image, and this is something which again is worthy of thought, to turn that image into an income later in the form of merchandise or promotion. But in 1974, unfortunately, came the economic crash that hit both the United States and Europe, and knights on horseback were victims. But you can see from these pictures the way in which we had developed an idea. We had begun with merely this idea of a few farmers on horses, and we had developed it into a phenomenal show. We invented trophies. We made the knights believe that they were knights. We produced menus. We ran restaurants in the theme. We cannot basically deny then that a combination of theatre, staging, architectural design, and direction will lead us, in fact, to new kinds of creative heights. The conclusion is that whilst we praise opera and we love to talk about the Metropolitan, we are, and the Lincoln Center, we are much more likely to be found in Disney World as a general statement, or in Las Vegas, which is a kind of adult theme park. And architect John Pasteur sees it basically this way, that these worlds are immense and complicated mediums of communication, taking as their content earlier forms of information transfer and remnants of earlier cultures. The potential work from the design of such major projects as a theme park, which anything between $150 to $500 million, or even in the case of Epcot, $1 billion, had architectural organizations in the 70s reeling with the prospects of a market, of a new market, the leisure recreational market. And this market, in financial terms, in 1982, was $6.80 per every $100 of total American spending, just merely in the pursuit of pleasure. That's a phenomenal figure. And that's on sports, on hobbies, on you name it. But every one of those requires, in some instances, specialized building. The pursuit of pleasure is, in leisure recreational terms, a major market, and we have invested heavily in it, producing a division which we now say is for creating for the people having fun. The market is an active market, it is a passive market, and HHCP's excursion into this market was primarily for two reasons. One, financial, because it wanted a slice of the Disney pie, and secondly, geographical, because it was close to Disney in Orlando. And so was born the concept of Epcot. Now, you may have some difficulty looking at this slide. This is a Disney master plan, and it shows in the center the Epcot Center, which is divided into two sections, Future World and World Showcase. Both are built and have now been opened for 1 year, and both of them are to some extent, in my opinion, not so much a failure, but have not quite yet achieved the objectives that were set out for them. To give you some little bit of background, Walt Disney, when he was alive, conceived Epcot as an experimental prototype community of tomorrow. His thoughts were to basically build a giant megadome and to construct a world of the future in which people would actively take part, live and work. This was very much a dream view. Somewhere down the line it began to change and alter. And when Walt Disney died, his brother Roy Disney, who was much more a financial guru, took over the Disney Corporation, and they fell back to a concept which is really an adult theme park, not so much a prototype community. The whole project of Epcot takes place in 890 acres, within more than 40,000 acres that Disney owns in Orlando. And the car park to Disney World, in fact, can be seen at the top left-hand part of the project. The spaces are separated by attractive landscaping buffers, but within the park itself, the spaceship Earth, which is the great dome, the giant golf ball as it's been described, dominates everything, and I have a lot of problems with that. Here we're basically looking at an aerial of Epcot. On the right-hand side, the golf ball and the world of the World Future Showcase, which is the scientific achievements that are basically sponsored by major sponsors, people like General Electric, Kodak, you name it, they're there. And out of the sponsor system, Disney has been able to have their pavilions almost entirely paid for. Something like $30 to $40 million per building, entirely paid for by sponsorship. The reality is that this project has really not cost Disney as much as it would appear. On the left-hand side, the lake, which is basically has been formed by sculpting and excavating to provide ground fill for the rest of the project. And around the lake will be eventually filled in as many of the World Showcase pavilions as the ground space will allow. There are a number of major planning failures. There is no internal communication ground transportation system. There is, and I will come on to this in a few minutes, a very real problem with theming and environment and of the collision of scale and size of pavilion projects, one next to the other. Our own project at Epcot has been the American Adventure Pavilion. This was the focal point at the end of the lake and is supposed to represent an American colonial hall of independence period. The pavilion is in fact a giant audio animatronic theatre that is designed to demonstrate in a period of about 25 or 30 minutes an audio animatronic theatrical display of the evolution of the United States of America with moving Benjamin Franklin and other characters. The design brief calls for a 100,000 square foot structure of 3 stories. But before any work was done by Helman Holy Shower Peacock, the project was evolved, schematically designed in California by WED, the Disney design arm, and engineers carried out all of their evaluations. The architects, Helman Holy Shower Peacock, are in this case consulting architects and engineers, and they are going to refine those schematics, and they are going to bring the project within the code requirements, and they are going to produce all the working drawings and the documents and the construction management and construction overseeing. These are some pictures taken during the construction. I'll be very happy to talk about these afterwards in the questions if you want to. Basically, relatively standard architectural construction technique. You get some kind of concept of the scale of the thing, and that's one of the problems. The problem is, how can you turn a major, massive theatre into a relatively small-scale Georgian building without some kind of problem? Inside, the plastered ceilings in the main hall and auditorium are very complicated. They required design with computer-aided drafting equipment. Elliptical coffered domes are part of the internal decor. Rolling clouds form an auditorium ceiling for acoustical reflectance. Here you can see some kind of quite complex floor. And the inspiration for this building is, according to Disney, a combination of several historical structures, and there again there is a problem. How can you possibly produce a building that is a combination of other buildings? Fronts and sides on the exterior. Here you can see on the inside some kind of concept of the scale. Front and sides have real brick, and a third of each side has real brick as facing. But the 2/3 on the back of the sides are coloured stucco to save money. There are all kinds of gimmicks. There's a lot of use of GRP, of fibrous plaster in these projects. And again, this is questionable. Should this take place or should it not take place? We believe that it's valid to use these in order to achieve an effect. And in a sense, I have no real problem with this as a building, but I do have a great deal of problem with this as a building compared with the next building to it, which is a sort of pastiche of Italy. The golf ball has come under tremendous criticism. Epcot has been described as a Tilto world for intellectuals, a Dumbo ride through human progress. And really there's a lot to criticize, but there's a lot to marvel. And so I think only 1 year into this project, I really want to refrain from making too many savage comments. The basic problem that I have with it, and the problem that all architects must have, is the laws of proportion and the interrelationship of buildings one with another. And to illustrate what I mean, I'm now going to show you the Italian section, and I've basically interwoven with the Italian section some real pictures of Venice, and I want you to try and compare the two. Here is the maquette, the original Disney model for the Italian pavilion that gained the approval of the Italian government. I don't understand why that happened. Because here you have an extraordinarily foreshortened, squashed Doge's Palace. Everybody knows the Doge's Palace is on the right-hand side of the Campanile. And here's the Campanile in the middle. And at the end is some very strange Romeo and Juliet structure. And on the right-hand side is a villa from Capri that is almost the same height as the Doge's Palace. It's all very logical. Now, I invite you to tell me whether this is the real Doge's Palace or whether it's the Disney's Doge's Palace. Anybody? Anybody suggestions? It's Disney. Now the astonishing thing is that in close-up, as some of these individual pictures will show, Disney is a superb detailer. The colours are almost there. These are not real stones. These are fiberglass. But the effect is so real that aging that Disney uses, that you can find cobwebs in the corners of doors. You can find dust lying on the lintels. And that dust has been applied with a dust machine. Real or false? Well, this is the real thing. And here, this is the real Doge's Palace, and the Doge's Palace is in my opinion, one of the most fantastic, perfect buildings ever constructed by man. It is perfect. It fits the laws of proportion. Here again is the real thing. The Doge's Palace is on the right. The Campanile is on the left. Anybody knows that. But here's the Disney Campanile. Not bad. Not bad when you look at it in detail, in close-up. But really terrible when you get further away. And the further away you get, the worse it gets. Disney basically has forgotten the sense of theatrics, forgotten how to use landscaping and buffering to build an Italian environment. The people who clean the streets of Disney in Italy wear kepis and look like Moroccan soldiers. red London buses roll through the piazza. I have a lot of problems with that, because basically there is an intermixing of themes that to my mind is really unacceptable. Here's the real thing, the base of the Doge's Palace. I want to come on now to a project that I think some of you will have seen some drawings outside. In 1979, on ground which was only 5 or 6 miles removed from the Epcot construction, I was at work on the planning and design stages of what was intended to be the 3rd largest theme park in the world, Little England. This is a project I'm sure you've not heard about, but it's a project that in some sense deserves some form of recognition, because it is not merely a project on paper, but a project which in fact was substantially completed in its first phase before the inflation rate and other financial considerations put the project on hold. Little England was a dream of an entrepreneur called Louis Kahn, who had the vision to build in the United States an authentic English environment. It would be a theme park. It would have all of the rides which were themed in an English form, but it would also be very much a cultural experience. There would be a Globe Theatre, there would be country house, there would be a jousting arena, there would be a castle. And I haven't got a pointer, so I can't point out these sections, but in planning terms, the castle is the focal point. You can see that at the top part of the picture. And around the outside was going to be a lake system. Oh, maybe this is it. Yeah? How does it go on? Oh, great. Here's the castle. This is the focal point. And around this is, in fact, an entire river system that would be dammed and raised with a lock gate, so that the water was, in fact, very high in comparison with the land, allowing boats to float seemingly at water level. The key to the planning of this, which took more than 1 year to get to, and involved a lot of tremendous amount of mental activity by landscape planners, engineers, myself, other architects, to reach this particular plan, was for a total theme park of 295 acres, a park large enough to basically enable any one person with a family to walk every path in 1 day. This is the definition of a one-day theme park. A unique thing, which unfortunately we're really yet to still to try, is in fact, here's the entrance gate. And here is an entirely three-dimensional English village with a spinal secondary English village that employs a Disney system of constructing facades on really effectively pre-engineered buildings. The first part of the village was designed to be as authentic as we could make it, and you'll see some pictures in a minute of how authentic that effort was. And the entire village was designed to act as a retail outlet to the gates of the park, so that the park could be closed at night, and yet this part could function as a separate economic entity. Over here is a flume ride. These large industrial buildings contain rides, dark rides. This is an English country house with a very formal landscape setting, a farm, an area for horse training, which the horses here servicing through the farm the medieval arena. The medieval arena was intended to run for 4 or 5 times a day, one show lasting anything between an hour and a half. Over here, an entire permanent Renaissance fair. Here, an English hamlet with architecturally correct buildings going back to 13th century, to the wheeled house construction, timber construction with real thatch roofs. And it's interesting that we managed to convince the local Florida authorities to change the code for wood shakes to accept straw and reed as a method of roofing. We had brought from England 4 buildings which were built in the 17th century barn structures, which we fundamentally designed and adapted, hurricane clipped and so on, that we could heighten the sense of authenticity within the park. Over here, this spine here was for children, and in fact were miniature rides called London Park, miniature rides of all the things that they could do, the adults could do elsewhere. Here was a river rapids ride, and here was a series of structures designed very much along the lines of the pier structures that we saw earlier on, Edwardian structures. Ultimately, a castle, and finally, when the projected attendance had reached 5 million people a year, we intended to build a northern entrance, which was a fishing village. Around this, in the whole master plan of over 1,392 acres of land, a conference centre, condominiums, hotel developments, motel developments, and so on. You know, the usual peripheral and important money-earning support structures to a theme park. The master model, which we built kind of in-house, really was a phenomenal effort. I won't go into the whole thing, but this was a whole team of people building this thing. And here you can see more or less in basis. This was constructed on a scale of 1 to 50. And really is a massive labour, both of love, but also very useful for us. We used optics, television techniques to be able to get down and kind of plan an environment which would be buffered one from the other. Because the point about this, as opposed to Epcot, was that each section, historical section, would be entirely authentic. If you went into the 14th century, you would be in the 14th century. The only characters that you would see would be dressed in the 14th century costume. The only architecture you would see would be of that period. And you would not see any ride or hovering steel gantry or any other thing which would remind you of the 20th century. And that took a tremendous amount of planning. In addition, something like 1.5 million cubic feet of earth was required to be moved. And so we got onto the land in about November of 80, and we began to construct on this land. In landscaping terms, and I want to quickly and briefly mention landscaping as being a very, very important part of the total development. The landscape architect was sent to England and basically had a course there, 6 weeks, at Kew and various other places, learning about English plants and trying to find out plants which would adapt to the Florida environment. This whole entranceway here was designed, was going to be as very much an English park, with park entrance and gates, dual carriageway through, retention ponds, massive drainage system, and so we began to construct. And by January of 81, 5th of January 81, we had constructed a 15-foot berm with 400,000 cubic yards of earth. This is a huge amount of earth to carry. And the earth was coming, in fact, from borrow pits, which, in fact, form part of the water retention and water drainage system on the 1,392 acres of land. In the foreground, you see some of the crates of materials, authentic materials, which we bothered to have shipped from the UK. It was a tremendous joy on the day that we opened the crates and began to take out some of these very early timbers. And we look at them in detail, you can still see the original carpenter's marks. And we were assisted in this task by a company that has been specializing in the removal and reconstruction of half-timber buildings almost since the day they were constructed, a company called Durnall, that has a headquarters here in the United States, and it rebuilds castles, country houses, and half-timbered structures all over the world. You can see the mortise and tenon joints on these timber pieces. And here is one that is actually under construction. What we've done is, in fact, raised the base on a block plinth, and in this instance we are incorporating an air conditioning system into the floor rather than into the upper roof members in order to enhance the internal environment and to make it as realistic as we possibly can. Here a little bit later you can see that we're using some new material, some old material, but by and large this structure is a 17th century structure. And it makes these buildings, with some modification, almost the oldest buildings in America. Now the rest of this first part of the English village was very much contemporary Florida construction. And when I say Florida, I don't mean to be disparaging about Florida, but there are many things which we do down there which we don't need to put cavity walls, we don't need to build the kind of foundations that you'd require up here. We have no frost, and we get by with an awful lot of slipshod work, unfortunately. Here you see trusses mounted, in fact, laterally on the face of the block. This, in fact, will ultimately form a phony jetted floor. The buildings are, in fact, copies of what we would call post-medieval houses, 17th, 18th century village houses. Here is the beginning of a 3-story jetted construction, and the rear of the complex as we built it up. You can see that on the roofs here, rather than using fiberglass, which we could have done, we resorted to real tiles. And we had a problem with those tiles because the tiles, when they arrived, were in fact English lug tiles. They required drilling. Each one required drilling and fastening to battens with copper nails. We lost a lot of tiles that way, but the owner thought it was worthwhile, and we thought it was worthwhile to achieve that extra effort of authenticity. And this is really, I'm not trying to say this is perfect by any means, it is not, but it shows you that really with Disney money they could have done very much more in the way of constructing and going back to proper sources for their thematic guidance in building. These are using lap boarding as another technique. On the left-hand side, you now see one of the half-timber buildings has been infilled. The wattle and daub, which were the weave reeds, cow dung, and matches of horsehair, have been replaced by the scrim and more contemporary interior materials, and then finally stuccoed, very much leaving the same effect as the original plaster, rough plaster, of an English domestic rural building. From the roof, you can see the quite complex roof shapes. The chimneys are, in fact, the stacks are non-functional, but the weight of them is quite substantial, and therefore required very careful design in the roof trusses themselves to support the weight of the brickwork. This building here, which represents the backside of an English village Georgian building of the mid-19th century, is in fact roofed with Welsh slate, another material which we brought over and erected. Here you can see the kind of detail that we really got. Quite astonishing. A large number of architects who've been to Orlando have come with me and really quite marveled at this particular project. Unfortunately, the whole project is really wasting away at the moment because of a change of developer. But there's a substantial amount of really quite authentic work here. Here you can see a wall tile which is called clubs and spades, and they're basically being hung on the side there in the same way that you hang the roof tiles, but they're just literally hung off the tile battens. Now you can see the beginning, the formation of the facing using the 2-inch facing bricks, and being able to build out using soldier courses, fan soldier course headers. We attempted to construct into these buildings as much authenticity as we possibly could get. Here on the inside you can see one of the medieval buildings being used as a pub, with in this instance the air conditioning in fact mounted in a phony fireplace. The whole wall was moved forward by about 3 or 4 feet. The great medieval timber basically still carries that phony wall, but the air conditioning unit and the trunking is basically behind the wall. You can see here again that we've gone to great effort to even restore the rod and dowel methods for holding these up, even though in fact this wasn't necessary, because the thing is bolted to steel structure on the inside, and there's no particular reason for the retention of the structural form of the timbering. In fact, there are several places where we couldn't get the original members to fit, and you can see here is a large crack that basically runs down between this vertical post and this diagonal post. And here the lovely effect that you can obtain with the tiles. Over here is a window which is a diamond pane window. Again, this was a real diamond pane window, a modern window, which in fact we had made up to a design. And again, something which in budget cutting in these types of projects could easily have become squared or in fact done away with entirely. And every single little detail you see is often a political victory with the developer, that we've actually fought for the retention of that particular architectural detail in order to enhance the quality of the project. So I think we need to go back again to the next slide. A total construction value, $25 million of construction. 16 storm drains laid throughout the whole property. I mean, phenomenal amount of work really undertaken. And it's very, very sad to be involved in a project like this that eats up 60, 80 hours of your working week over years, and then basically have it die because of some external economic factors. But that's the business. We come on now to some interiors. This is a sort of a Georgian interior. Here you can see how we've basically wedded one of the half-timbered buildings. We've run it through here. We've added this section on so that in fact the staircase in fact will work against the half-timbered interior wall, and that allows in fact people to be able to study the wall and the timber, put their hands on the timber and so on. And even in the case of where we needed to produce a modern door frame, we realized that we couldn't do everything old, and one of our problems was that doors have to be strong and modern. They can't be really old, and therefore we had to construct modern frames, jambs and so on to accommodate the modern door. But again, we did it with some kind of quality, and the aging process, once this was completed, was shot blast or sandblasted from the outside, attacked a little bit with acid, and then basically worked all kinds of color into the wood, and that, believe it or not, will achieve a very remarkable old look to the door. Could you focus that a little, if you could? Thank you. Here you can see the finished building. It's not entirely successful. The barge boards are a little heavy. The dormers here are overkill. But basically this is still quite a charming structure, and my argument is that this is substantially more authentic, even though it is not being completed with landscaping and signage and hanging signs and street furniture, than the kind of thing which we see in Disney. And I want to show the English Village in Disney as a comparison to this. Here's another little corner we finished, and we built a medieval bridge. We intended to have a mill. This is the mill under construction. Again, another little point here is that we encourage the stonemasons to throw away their lines, and the walls are constructed off-center. They lean, the coins wander all over the place, and we use Indiana limestone, which is basically cut and chopped in half and placed to give some kind of feeling of a gravity wall. Here is the mill 9/10 completed. The position at the heart of the great mill wheel, this is a mill race, which in fact would have water pouring through it. And the intention of this particular mill is a 360-seat restaurant of high quality. This, by comparison, is the Disney village that represents the United Kingdom. And again, in individual terms, in detailed terms, it's really quite good. But if you look at it very carefully, you find an awful lot of things wrong. It is a combination of quite carefully researched and sometimes absolutely absurd whimsy. There's no other word for it. There is a thatched cottage there which is an absolute disgrace. It's straight out of Cinderella. It has a little stack rising out of the plastic thatch, and I want to burn it down. If it would burn, which it won't. You can see really that in detail, it's very uncanny. You can take these kind of pictures and you can come away thinking that you're looking at almost at the real thing. In soft terms, we're looking at a building in London, a town building in London. And we're looking, of course, at some signage here which is relatively accurate. This is very unnerving. The scale of this is quite astonishing. Here it looks like this really is quite a large structure. But in fact, a man, I don't have a man here, but I will show you, a man is going to be standing almost up to the height of the doorway. And all of this is basically reduced on such a scale that these windows, this whole level here, running through here, would only accommodate a family of dwarfs. This is sad. When we had gone through the same process to get real thatch, it's very sad to realize that every single strand of this plastic thatch has been wired by hand in the Disney fabrication shops. And these tiles are all GRP. The flashing is phony, the brick stack is phony, the windows are phony, and yet, in a strange sort of way, it still works. And I'm not going to apologize for it, I'm not going to support it. Disney, in fact, represents, as in fact, in the whole United States, a case for the reconstruction of many older historical projects. Primarily, obviously, because of the rather short period of history. In Europe, in fact, there's some other things, interesting things happening. I want to bring you on to a very new project. This is almost a brand new project, and you are the very first people to see this. This is a theme park in Britain that is currently developing. I'm very closely in touch with the planners of this project, and it's called Wonder World. And it's designed to be an urban theme park taking place in a northern climate. Doesn't have the luxury of being a all year round 365-day operation, unless it's entirely enclosed with glass. And going back to the Crystal Palace again, here it is in modern form. This has been developed by an architectural group called Derek Walker and Associates, who are responsible for the Milton Keynes architectural development, the new town in Britain. And they've really done a super job. In plan, you're looking at car parking, you're looking at a central theme building which is 1,400 feet in length. There is a central undercroft and 2 levels in which themes will be presented on a more adult form. There is a peripheral development that runs around the outside. There are theatres, golf courses, and all kinds of other projects. The interesting thing about this project is that the planners have built this on land which belongs to some old steel mills. Steel mills have been blitzed, and therefore they've got their land very cheap. Secondly, it's being constructed in a place with very, very high unemployment, and therefore there are substantial local grants, there are common market grants, EEC grants, to aid the development of this project. We're looking at another $150 million first phase project, rising to at least $600 or $700 million. This is the kind of figure that it costs to build these things out. The rendering is very interesting, by the way. It's an unusual technique, this watercoloring technique. Here you see a series of module bays, each substantial size, representing various different themes. In elevation terms, again, this is another project which one can really kind of work into, but I just brought these pictures to show the kind of thing that's going on over there. This is very much like the Georges Pompidou Center, in a sense, in Paris, with all the services left to the outside to allow as much internal space for exhibitions as possible. Here you can see a drawing of the undercroft level, the lower concourse level, and the upper concourse level. This is one of the anticipated rides. This is an adaptation of a flume ride, the ride into the stomach. You ride on, don't ask me where it comes out. But it just shows you that basically we can have really a lot of fun in the design of these projects. The theatre, again, has got a very unusual suspended canopy. We've done a lot of work with canopies, of air-supported canopies, and I see a lot of development of this happening in the future, particularly in the international exposition area, insofar as they can be put together really quite rapidly and cover, as you know, tremendous spans. These are some various different adaptations of the way the area will adapt itself to different games, volleyball, basketball, and so on. And then finally, this is a section through the energy pavilion. Really shows quite a lot of interesting design work. A project that, and we are getting kind of more towards the close now, so that those of you who want to run can run fairly soon. A project that I was asked to talk about is this very recent one for the students of Daytona Beach. I'm currently working on, right now, in my office, for R.J. Runnels and for Anheuser-Busch. There are two huge, both tobacco and brewery companies, who are sponsors again, much as they sponsor the pavilions at Disney, sponsors in their own form of promotion all over the United States, in ski races and motor car racing, and I'm sure you've seen it all. In Daytona, which is the site of the spring break, and maybe some of you are going there next year, the Camel cigarette company is one of the largest sponsors, and it spends on average $2 to $3.5 million a year in that city alone over a period of under 1 month. Now that's not big bucks in architectural terms, but it's big bucks in promotional terms, and there's a great deal you can do with that money. And we're working right now on some designs for major rock shows, which will involve all kinds of new video projection techniques, working with MTV on having the thing filmed, new lighting, lasers, and so on. So we're doing this, and we're constantly learning as we go along. The Camel Amazon Adventure was a project that we carried out last year under an 8,000 square foot tensile structure that was designed to reproduce, in a sense, some of the Camel adverts, the Macho Man in the Jungle. You've probably seen, he's smoking by the swinging bridge, and so on. The interesting thing about this project is it was put together in 6 weeks, and that's all we had. And we carried out a study model. And this is an entire jungle which we're going to build inside a tent. It's very logical. The forms of the tent are not actually shown here, but basically the project was really quite a simple one. It was to create a series of stations around 7 masts. The 7 masts are the alloy mast of the tensile structure, and those masts have to be disguised. They have to, in other words, inside we have to make it look as much like a tropical forest as we can, and so we decided to model the mast on a banyan tree, which is a big tree that grows down in Florida, with tendrils, lots of tendrils, and 1,000 square foot structure that's set out on a car park, and without going through walking right the way through the thing, this is one of the masts when we finish with it. Every one of these is a separate piece, a separate component piece that has its own armature that is brought in. We covered the floor with a green carpet and with sound deadening material, and then we got a dispensation. All of this is fireproofed material. We brought in $250,000 worth of rented tropical foliage, and we put snakes and parrots. We have an entire swing bridge that is over a waterfall and a rushing pond. These are all commercial pools that have all been disguised out with phony edges lined with black plastic. You can see the balustrades have got organic forms to break up. By code we must have these, but we've got to have these organic forms in here to break the whole thing up. And the whole thing works remarkably well. The only problem we had was we wanted to put a secondary black internal envelope inside the canopy, but we discovered very quickly on when we erected this that we were destroying the geometrical splendor of the tensile structure, and we were giving ourselves a lot more problems. We had a problem of keeping the plants alive with ultraviolet lamps and so on, and in the end we decided to drop that. And surprisingly, although you can still see the modern form of the tensile structure, the project internally works remarkably well. There are swamp ponds that are filled with turtles and little baby alligators that you've got to cross over on a hand-held rope. And of course, camels get lots of mileage out of this and they give you premium, they give you a t-shirt to take away. I survived the Amazon adventure jungle. Now this project, just as a matter of interest, in dollar terms, it cost around $500,000 to carry out. And as an architectural organization, rather than making the 5%, which might be the standard fee for this, we would make around about 10%, because really it's outside the norms of a standard contract. It's very difficult to define this type of project within a standard building contract. How we got the Jeep on the raft, it was a phenomenal engineering problem. It's the kind of thing they give you when you go in the army. How do you get the Jeep onto the raft? How do you fill the raft with the water? How do you fill the pond with the water? We laid out the form of the pond. We rolled out the black plastic underliner. We built the raft over the top of jabalite blocks, which had been calculated to give us additional buoyancy. We pushed the Jeep up a ramp onto the raft. We then constructed the sides of the pond. We rolled the black plastic up to the sides of the pond. We filled it with a fire hydrant, and miracle upon miracle, the whole thing floated up. Getting it down was quite easy. We even brought a plane, and we brought it into the middle of the Amazon tropical jungle. And that's just a kind of example of just a small but nevertheless quite creative, fun project that you get involved in when you get into LRE. The last two projects I want to try and cover are SeaWorld, which I think is really quite serious architecture, and Universal Studios, which I really want to make a mention to. SeaWorld, as you know, is split into 3 departments. It has a large park in Orlando, the largest, one in San Diego, and one in Ohio. This was my first concept for the SeaWorld Whale Stadium, which was to have an arena seating 6,000 people and a berm which would run all around the outside. As we began to modify this, we faced some very real opposition in conventional architectural terms. We knew we were on a tight budget, we were on a $13.5 million budget, and we knew that the roof that we recommended was going to be outrageous, probably a little complex, and very difficult to sell to the client. And so we went through a whole series of engineering studies to look at different roofs. But the thing we didn't like about these was that all of them basically left us with columns that basically interrupted the site. And so finally we managed to convince our client to accept this very strange roof that is supported by these two massive columns and by a series of radial columns that run around the outside. This is 27 feet between the bottom and the top chord. Give you an idea of the scale, 200 feet across from column to column. The pool itself, the cluster of pools, when refined, hold 5 million gallons of man-made seawater. This will be the largest single marine facility in the world. You can see here that we made, this was actually the presentation model, and we showed it to SeaWorld. We took it in the dark, and we took a black cover off it, and they gasped. It wasn't what they expected. We've ultimately begun to refine the design. We have since punched the rear wall instead of leaving it open with a series of giant holes. We've looked at all the reveal, the detailing, the positive and negative reveals in the concrete work. And we've had a big problem, which is a big field problem, with trying to get the reveals that we've specified. And it's again another type of problem. We had a lot of problems with the contractor, unable to basically come up to the qualities of cement that we want, the qualities of the finite design finish that we wanted in the wall and in the detailing. Here you can see very much as some of you in the second year are doing, working with cardboard, making quick study models to see the effect of our design. Finally, we produced an adapted, slightly adapted variation. SeaWorld would absolutely not buy the berm that runs all the way around the outside. That, in my opinion, would be a major failure. We wanted to create an entirely unique environment, visual environment within the berm. You can see that the berm basically steps down and is very small and undulating, and it weakens this view down here because it allows the eye to wander over the whale show and through whatever shade structures we'll build here to cut down the solar effect of heating the water to whatever lies out beyond. And we think that's a big mistake. But nevertheless, we fought with this one and we couldn't win. Now it's under construction, and it will be completed in June of '84. I don't know, can we get that a little sharper? Here you see this is one of the biggest man-made holes in Florida. We've had a tremendous amount of problems with the structure design of this particular deep water pool. It's 35 feet down in the water table. And during this summer we had a lot of rain. We had phenomenal pressure build-up on our reinforced bars at the base of this, and we'll suffer from certain problems later on. But nevertheless, you can see the form of this as it's gradually evolving. Can you, is anybody out there? Great. It's very exciting to see your designs that start off in just a magic marker sense evolve into a major facility of this size. And we won an AIA Unbuilt Award from the Florida chapter for the design of this. I think the end result is it will probably produce a very exciting environment, but it will not come up to the standards that we set ourselves, and we as architects are therefore somewhat disappointed by what we're seeing going on. The final project I want to cover is the Universal Studios. We have the contract to work with Universal out in Hollywood to design their new theme park, which is also in Orlando. We don't need to move. And this project, again, will be about $130 million first phase, rising to $500 or $600 million, built on Kirtland Road near Orlando. And it is basically a more modern version of the theme park that is out in California that you ride through and you go through the Jaws and the Red Sea encounter and so on. And we're designing, at the moment we've designed this Art Deco sound theatre for them, and we're carrying out studies for the huge entrance gates, which will be in the form of Spanish Mexican Baroque architecture. This is a 600-foot long spinal building with reflecting ponds, Pacific palms and so on. These projects basically unannounced, and therefore we're just showing those in-house here. Basically, the leisure, recreation, and entertainment market is a market that may offend many contemporary architects. It may, in fact, worry a lot of people. We are not worried by it. I'm personally not worried by it. I love it. I think it's great. It's fun. I intend to go on in it, and I intend to enjoy myself. In summing up this whole talk tonight, and I should, by the way, just tell you, I'm designing a big theme park in Damascus in Syria, which shows you that we get around. I'd kind of apologize about some of the slides, or the lack of some of the slides which illustrated some of the historical section of this particular talk. However, there are just a few last axioms that I'd like you to remember. The first one is that new entertainment concepts down the years have always shown, have always basically provided the architect's brief and then the subsequent design solution. And I would really expect that to go on into the future. History shows also that imagination ran riot in design, embellishment at all times, and in my opinion it should also continue to do so in the future. There is nothing that cannot be built. My advice to everybody is that they master as many disciplines as possible. You may never move out of architecture, but you may, as I clearly have done, move into some of these other peripheral areas. And every one of these areas, from a discipline point of view, is a good area to be in, because the world of design is interlocking. And finally, he who does not tooteth his own horn, his horn goes untooteth. Which is basically one of the reasons why I'm here. And I'd like to thank you all very much for your patience, and leave the whole thing open to questions if you have any. Thank you.
I think a lot of you have been sitting quite a while, so we could take the questions informally, give some of you a chance to stand up. I want to thank Chris, and thinking what, just listening to your talk, it really made me think what a great theme park maybe this room could be someday. In the future we could all work on that.
We could work quite hard. Thank you.
Again.
Thank you.